Hello there, ladies, gentlemen, and unicorns. Thank you again for inviting me into your browser tab or your favorite smart device. If you're watching me on a watch, congratulations. I don't think that this is possible yet. So, thank you again. Today, I promised that we'll be looking at something that's more down to 3D graphics. That is basic modeling, texturing, mapping, shading, and that kind of stuff. But it's a little bit different than for games because I'll be looking at the workflow for doing offline renderings. That means nothing that is real time, although I won't be using too many high poly items, so I think the workflow should be pretty much the same until we're at the shading stage, because I will be optimizing things for a certain renderer. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, today's program is just more of what we've done the last weeks. Just to reiterate, let me switch over. Yes, there we are. I'll be working some more on the Ludum Dare postmortem. And if you recall from the last time, I'm still working on this shot here. If you're new to this program, I'm making a digital set extension, which means, let me just switch back here. Why can't I switch back? Oh, we're already starting off with technical difficulties, but not as many as we usually have. So let me make this a little bit bigger here. So for this scene here of me as the detective in front of a building, let's speed this up here. Just a little bit of stand-ins there. But the shot that I'm going to work on again is this one here, where only this portion where I'm walking towards this building here will be used, and the rest of it will be a digital set extension. And in the past two streams I already started on this. I did the layout and the concept, as you can see here. And this is just a very, very rough. Let's make this full screen. There we go. A very rough concept, just that you know what we will going to replace with the digital content. And we've already started the last time in Maya, and I'm going to add some more little details to it. In Maya, if you recall, last time we made this, we just made sure that the camera matches up, that we have some buildings in the background, and for this stream, I thought we'll be looking at adding some more props, for example, those lights here, or maybe a dumpster. And I'll be showing you of how my ways of acquiring things and doing modeling, and just, how I make models that are usable, that not only I can use them in my digital set extensions and visual effects, but also should the need arise for any games or sort of stuff like this, because I won't be using a lot of high poly models anyway, because everything, as you can see here, everything is pretty dark and dim and not too close to the camera, so I think we'll be good with relatively low poly models. Okay, before moving on, let's have a look at the chat and see if anyone is watching. And looks good. Thank you so much. Strapping my phone to my wrist right now so I can pretend it's a watch. I think we've all been there. And especially if you have some kind of fruit, probably an apple would help. So if you just strap it to your wrist, you can tell people you have an Apple Watch and you didn't pay as much as them for it. You're welcome. #lifehack. Okay, so still wonder where we'll stream next week, where Phil works on Ludum Dare pre-mortem. That's a good question. Yes, about next week, I will probably say this again at the end of this stream. Next week, Ludum Dare is happening, Ludum Dare 45, so I don't think that I will be streaming for two reasons. Reason number one is I probably won't have the time to stream because I'm finishing up my game. And reason number two is probably none of you will have time because you're finishing up your games should you participate. But the week thereafter, I will be playing any Ludum Dare 45 games live on stream. Well, at least this is the plan for now. But we will see if things change, and if so, why or how. But yeah, I don't think that they should change. Okay, so yes, this was Photoshop. Where did I? All right, I was here in full screen mode, and don't know how I can get rid of. No, I don't. Yes, let's save this. Okay, so okay, I closed Photoshop. Anyway, no need for Photoshop right now. I think I will open it up later again. Let's head to Maya and do some 3D modeling stuff. So my workflow for this is of the models myself, because there is a great site where you can get free models that you can use for your own projects, but there will be some issues with them, and this is what we'll be looking at. So let's make Maya a bit bigger here, because it's a little bit cramped here. Of course, everything's just hanging. So I hope there aren't too many dropouts there in the video. So okay, this is Maya, and as you've watched the last time, it's a little bit bigger, the UI, than last time, thanks to Roar, who told me on Twitter that I could, of course, scale up the UI. And usually I didn't like to do this, because for one thing is that it was always a little bit buggy and a lot of things were cut off. But apparently with Maya 2019, which I'm running right now, everything is working fine. And you know what? I'm going to restart this and scale it up even further, that all the labels are very legible on the stream. Again, that's the plan. I was using before, I'm still using my 4K screen, and everything is pretty huge, and since I'm streaming in HD or full HD only, so I don't think that it makes a lot of sense if you can't really read the labels or what am I doing, in case you're interested in this thing here. Okay, so why isn't Maya starting up again? As soon as I start streaming something, all my perfect preparations here start falling to pieces, because like with Photoshop before, I couldn't close it. Okay, so I think this is huge, but I think you can see now everything here in the user interface. And here in the outliner, we have a lot of chunk that I don't need, so I will clear everything. Yeah, okay, it did it by itself. So yes, I'm using Maya. Of course, you can use any 3D application that you want, because the workflows are principles are basically the same, no matter what software you use. I'm using Maya because I've been using Maya for the past 10 years, and I'm stuck with it. I can't adapt to Blender, because I will probably have to spend at least a month or two just trying to get used to the different workflows there. But basically what I'm doing is the same. Okay, so before opening up, let's have a look at the warehouse project we had last time. And I did a little bit of tweaking. So this is the camera here, and as you can see, it looks a bit better than last time, because I think Frank was the one who suggested that I could extend the seams on the original footage, just so that you know what I'm talking about. Well, it's not the seams, it's those divisions there in this wall, and yeah, I tried to make them line up as well or as perfectly as possible to the digital camera, of course, because this is the whole point, so that you can see things a little bit better here. Where are the view options, display options? There, over scan. Let's put it to 1 so that this is a bit bigger. And yeah, this is the camera view, right? I shouldn't have done this. Ah, damn it. I just, before I positioned the camera perfectly and forgot that I already had a keyframe set there, and now the camera always resets. Man, I thought I was so well prepared today, but apparently I wasn't. So let's open this scene again, and don't save it. And let's make sure here that the camera has a keyframe set to this rotation, so that when I'm moving around that it looks good again. So yeah, as you can see here, this is the final framing. There will be a billboard. Don't grow too attached to those black and white stripes on this building here. I just used it so that I could line up, like I said before, those stripes or those segments in the actual building as well as possible. This block here is just stand-in. And like I said, what I'm going to do today is adding a little bit more props to this scene to make it to start making it more lifelike. The good thing is that it's going to be it tries to convey that this is at night and it's a shady kind of neighborhood, industrial neighborhood at night. So we will have some vehicles standing there in the background, maybe a dumpster here in the foreground, maybe some crates or barrels, I'm not quite sure, just anything to fill up the frame and make it more interesting. And the good thing is, again, since it's dark, it doesn't have to be super detailed. The further you are, of course, to the camera, you need the more details you need. And I promised you a different or an interesting way to get free models. And if you Google free models, sooner or later you will probably end up here on Turbo Squid, which was, I think, was this Creative Crash before or Creative Cache or something? I'm not quite sure. This page has been around for, I think, yeah, over 10 years in one form or the other. And this is where I think I posted my first Maya models there just for free, because you can sell your models, which is quite a cool marketplace depending on what you need. As you can see here, you get a lot of gorgeous, very detailed models, and some of them cost, for example, this photorealistic heart here probably costs $1,000 or even above. Just okay, so we got here. Yeah, you can see probably, let's scale this up, that you can see some of the prices here. $1,800 for human anatomy. I mean, this is great if you have the cash, but if you don't, and this is pretty cool, you can search also for free stuff. So let's just, to demonstrate things, let's look at crate and search for crate. And there you can say price and free. And look at this, 62 free models of a crate are here. And when I'm scrolling up and down, you can see some are better looking, others aren't as good looking. And all you need is just an account there, and you can buy free things. For example, I bought this set here of barrels and crates. And like I said, this is great because a lot of modeling first-timers like myself post to this website here, and you can use it for games. And since if you don't want to spend any money, there's still something there. By the way, these crates, I tried to download these before. The thing is, whoever uploaded this forgot to upload the actual model file, and all you get is a Photoshop file of the texture. So this is not very helpful. So of course your mileage may vary, I think, but to me it's a very good starting point, especially for some kind of props that I need just lying around in background where I'm not quite sure if I should spend the time to model them. But the thing is, like I said, at least for me, a lot of first timers post their first models here. I mean, it's free. You can't really argue with that because in the end, you get what you pay for. And a lot of times what you pay is not much and what you get is not much in a sense. But we will be looking at this in a bit because I already found some models and downloaded them. And today, yeah, I promised on Twitter to look into some of the misconceptions regarding modeling and texturing and shading. So in a sense, we're just getting free models and then cleaning them up so that I can work with them and that they all have similar properties. Okay, so what does this mean in action? Let's head back to Maya. And there are people shouting outside because they probably want to be on the stream and their wish has been granted by sheer volume. Okay, let's have a look at the chat. Looks like a great resource, saves link. Yeah, Turbo Squid. I think you can also get 3D models from what's it called? Google SketchUp, I think. So with Maya, and I'm pretty sure with Blender and Cinema 4D and Softimage or whatever 3D application you're using, they take OBJ files, which is pretty much the text TXT, the ASCII file of 3D graphics. It's just an ASCII readable file format that just lists all the vertices there and how the normals are and how they are connected, and that's it. So it's a pretty robust file format. The downside to this is you can't have animations, you can't have light sources, you have to have additional material for or additional file that stores, I think, the material information if you want this sort of thing. So yeah, OBJ files are usually the best file format if you want to interchange with a lot of different people. If you're just in one ecosystem, like I'm here with Autodesk, with Maya and Studio Max, then FBX is probably the best format that you want. I'm telling you this because a lot of sources, or a lot of source meshes that you get are just for a certain application. For example, a 3ds is for 3D Studio Max. This one here is for Blender. This is apparently other. So you're never quite sure, and sometimes when you think about it, you get a nice model, and then it's in the wrong format, and then you have to jump through a lot of hoops just to get it converted, and then something breaks. So in the end, you're better off looking first at what what kind of models something or what kind of formats a model comes in. Okay, again, I've been talking way too much. Let's have a look at the individual models. And I've already prepared here something for us. Where is it? Shared assets. Yeah, when I'm working on a project like this, and I know that I'll be using a lot of 3D objects that aren't individual or aren't unique for just one shot or one scene, I create a folder that I call shared assets. I think this also is very applicable to gaming projects, when you, like in Unity, when you have objects that aren't just in one scene but in multiple scenes. And with visual effects, it's pretty much the same thing. And you can see, I'm not quite sure if you can read it, but it's quite big here for me. Got already a bunch of TurboSquid files downloaded, and I also cleaned up a bunch of those TurboSquid files. So just to show you, there's this wooden crate here. This is the cleaned up version. And by cleaned up, I mean it's here in the center of the origin. The scale is not perfect, but at least it's in the right ballpark, because sometimes you don't know what the models in what sizes they come in. The other thing is I made sure that the normals look right, that everything has a nice name, that everything has a nice shader, and that the texture and the texture mapping is correct. Because this is, just to show you, this is how I want it, how I need it to be, so that I have all those different individual sides of this crate. Yeah, just that I can work with them. So let's undo this. But yeah, this is how I would like it to be. And let's make a new scene and import the model and see how, just as an example, how those free files usually come in. So TurboSquid, create wooden one. It's an OBJ, and yeah, let's zoom out here. And it comes in this exploded form here, but it is one big mesh here. So you need to separate this mesh here. Then of course it's black right now because I switched over to the texture information. And when we'll be looking at the UV maps, that are the texture coordinates, where do I have it? UV editor. You can see here what the hell is going on. Everything lies on top of each other. Again, if you're looking just for any kind of free model and you're happy to spend a little bit of time and effort to make it work for you, this is perfect. But if let's say I would have paid like $5 for this, or even $10, this is probably something that I would rate very poorly because you can't work like this. So and the one misconception is that I found is when texturing. Let me just show you another model. Let's import here. Where do you have it? Crates and barrels. Just to show you here on TurboSquid, it's this asset here, crates and barrels, where I thought, yeah, this looks nice. I'm just need some kind of barrel and some kind of crates. And it even got a material definition here, which is good. And if you import it, you can see here, this is what you get. It's this little still life scene, and of course you can't really work with it because you need this you need all the objects on the origin, of course, and without any kind of rotation. I don't need those walls here. And if we are going to look at the where do I have it? There, the UVs again, or yeah, the texture coordinates. There we are, UV editor. It looks a little bit better, but again, it's just on top of each other, and I'm not quite sure how this person mapped this barrel just from one side. So my guess is, again, it's like with me when I submitted 3 models to TurboSquid. They're just starting out, which is fine. But here, the texture for this barrel here, if I just switch over here to the textured view, yeah, it's just all over the place. It's it's really not something that you can work with. And I think it's, for myself, it's always good practice to just, yeah, clean up stuff and try to solve all the issues that you have there. Because in the end, you want an asset that you can use, in my case, not only for films, but maybe for games as well. And what a big problem here with this, for example, was that I think it came in 3 or 4 different texture files. And this is another misconception that's pretty sticky, I think, not so much with games, but with assets for VFX and CGI, is that, yeah, the more individual files for textures you have, the better. And with games, of course, you want big texture atlases, for example, that you just can minimize all those draw calls, because with every new texture you have to load this texture from the RAM and access it, and each time that the GPU looks up where a pixel is in the texture, it just takes time, especially if you have to open a lot of files. And it's just not, it's not a big issue if it's just 3 or 4 maps, but sometimes it's like a couple of hundred, because this can explode easily. And this is one thing that I want you to take away, is try to minimize your maps to a sensible level. For example, if you know that I mean, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to have those barrels and those crates in one texture map unless you know that they always are in the same place or in the same level. For example, if you have, I don't know, traffic lights, they are made up of individual parts, but they all are part of the traffic light. But it wouldn't make sense to have just one map for the green lamp and one map for the red one, and so on. So you want to maximize all the space that you have in this UV map, in the texture map, at the same time trying to minimize any kind of distortions and repetitions. So yeah, it's always a trade-off, and I think this is, some people hate UV mapping and I, for myself, it's very relaxing. It's a little bit of zen to myself. Okay, so I've been wisecracking a lot with models, so let's, for example, take this one here and fix it. I just want this barrel here, and I can see already some issues here, that we have this strange kind of star shape here, and I'm not quite sure where this comes from, but I think it is because of this weird kind of softening here. And if I zoom in here, you can see that some edges are white and others are green. Those are the edges of the texture pages, or where polygons or patches are not connected to each other, which means there a new section in the texture map, or a new shell starts there. In short, it's not optimal. It's not optimal. So the first thing that I do is I look at the UV map and see if there was any effort put into this, and in this case it doesn't look too bad, but again, it doesn't look too good either. So I'll be disregarding this, and let's try to fix this. Okay, first thing is that I want to get the scale right, and I switch over from centimeters to meters, so that one division here on the grid, if you can see it, is 1 meter. So let's say that this barrel here, the next thing that you notice is that the origin of this barrel here lies outside, which I don't want, so I'm going to snap this one here, of course, to its center here, and snap it here to the center of my grid. Now I'm going to scale it up and have it like so. So the diameter of this barrel is roughly 1 meter. Again, I'm just saying roughly, because in the end, when you have it unless it's very important that everything is perfectly to scale, you can always scale it up and down. should the need arise. And since I'm working here now with cinematic visual effects, it means everything is just lights and smoke and mirrors. In short, it means sometimes you scale things up that they just appear the correct size, but if you look at them from a different angle, everything falls apart. So this is why I'm very content with everything just having roughly the right size. Okay, the next thing is that I'm trying to get those kind of star shape issues here. I think it has to do with normal. With the softening of the normals. So this is, in Maya, it's called here mesh display because it's how the mesh appears. So I'm going to say harden edge and see how things are. But this didn't help a lot because, of course, the mesh topology is a little bit weird. Okay, then let's try to set the vertex to the face. And this did the trick. And everything looks a lot more cleaner. Okay, so right now, of course, that I hardened all the normals, it means, yeah, every edge is considered a hard edge, and this really doesn't do us any favors here in the appearance. So I'm going to say soften harden edges, and this means that I can set a certain angle. In this case, it's 30 degrees. And if two polygons are less than 30 degrees connected, their edge is considered a soft one. And in most of the cases, 30 degrees is a perfectly reasonable value. As you can see here, it looks a lot better already. Okay, let's have a look at the chat because I can see something going on there. Sometimes maybe you only need a crate texture. Yeah, sometimes it's fine that when you only need a crate texture because in this one instance here where I said, yeah, actually, when you don't need a model, you don't post your model in industrial containers 3D models. So yeah, because this only had the texture file. I also want to be on the stream. Hey Prada, welcome to be. Now you are on the stream. Hey lads, hey Tor, and Inkty is also here. You have to read the UV mapping if you add more vertices, or is there a trick using Blender? Let's take the audience because I'm not quite familiar with Blender. In Maya, if you have already mapped something and you add divisions in between there, you don't have to do the mapping again. But if you create completely new polygons, they just take up the whole texture page and it looks completely wrong. So this is why I start to get, before doing anything, I want to get the model right, because I usually do my UV mapping afterwards, unless of course I have a certain kind or different shapes. For example, if I have something that's a spiral, maybe like I can't think of an example right now, but it's just maybe it's a tube, but you coil it up to a coil, for example. Of course, you don't do the mapping afterwards. First, you start with a cylinder, then do the mapping, and then you twist the cylinder, and in the end, you get a much better mapping than when you want to try to map the coil afterwards. But yeah, this is just a edge case in a sense. Yeah, first always make sure that the mesh looks correct. This seems a barrel of fun. Oh, it will be. I mean, if you start by making a low poly model and want to give it more detail without having to redo the UV mapping. Yeah, usually I start with low poly mappings, and then, like I said, when you insert divisions, they just fall in between where something is that you already mapped. For example, just to show you, let's open up this UV editor here, and now when I smooth this mesh, where is it? There it is. By adding some more divisions to it, I click apply. And as you can see here, now it got a lot of more polygons, but all those things here that are already mapped, they are the polygons, the newly created polygons fall between the UV coordinates that are already set, which is fine. So this is why I try to keep everything as low poly as possible before, yeah, I'm going to do the subdivisions. You can also work with NURBS, but I've been burned with NURBS so horribly in the past because they are completely different. They are like Bezier curves in 3D space, and yeah, it's another barrel of worms. And then of course there are subdivision surfaces where you make some kind of cage, as it is called. You do a low poly modeling, and then the subdivision happens during rendering, where everything gets approximated to curves. So in the end you always have a perfect round shape, but again you have to make sure while you're modeling and texturing you have to account for that everything will be rounded in rendering. But for games, mostly this is not an issue. I think those subdivision surfaces were developed by Pixar. I think Toy Story 2 around that time. There was also a SIGGRAPH paper on the thing. Yeah, it's just for when you're doing cinematics that you don't see the polygon edges at, for example, perfect round starships. Okay, so let's continue here with our barrel. And I would say the topology of the mesh looks fine. I'm not too happy with how this cap here looks. So let's try to make this weird star shape here look a little bit better. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'll switch over here to wireframe display so you can see that this has a weird star shape. Yeah, and this is not good. So I'm going to switch over now, and you know what, I'm going to apply a different shader that you can see better what I'm doing there. By the way, you can see also there are 4 different kinds of materials already for this thing here. So I'm going to make this one here a bit darker that you can see it better, I hope. And here we are. So taking care of this weird star shape means that I'm going to delete it. So I'm just extending here my selection, and I'm going to delete this whole thing here, and instead I'm going to select all the edges that are here on the inner side of this barrel, and I'm going to extrude them inwards like this. And you can see already that this shape looks a lot better than the other before. So I start out with this one here, and then do some extrude them again, and just keep adding divisions. I don't think that I'll be needing any more like this, but yeah, I think this should be fine. And like so, because this is going to be much easier to map and texture, and you have less chance of things reflecting in a weird way, because sometimes with the normals and you have those weird topology issues, sometimes your specular reflections just keep or pick up this weird star shape if they are not completely planar. Okay, so I think I would say I fixed this. Then I will select all those vertices here and just merge them to a single one together here. So that is edit mesh, merge to center. There we go. And as you can see here, this already looks a lot nicer. And here the interesting part with the bottom of the barrel is that as far as I know, those barrels are pretty symmetrical, meaning that there's also this recession that is on top there is of course on the bottom. But this one here is completely flat, but which is fine as long as you keep it like this. In the end, like I said, for cinematic visual effects that I know that the barrels will always be on the ground, I could just go ahead and delete the whole bottom side, because if I know that I won't be needing them, I don't want to spend time having to texture this the bottom here, which will also probably eat up some space on the texture map because you want to maximize the space and so on and so forth. But should you of course use it for a game, or you want to just put it sideways, you need a bottom part there. And you know what? Instead of doing the same thing that I did there, I'm going to just, this was the top, there we go, front view. I'm going to delete one half and then duplicate and just reflect the other half that is already done. And you know what? And this is where it comes in handy, that I know that what I will be doing. because since I know that I won't be doing any more modeling on this after this is reflected, I can already save myself a little bit of work and map already this top part here. And there are different kinds of mapping, texture mapping, and the one that I like best is the simplest one, that is planar mapping. It's like projecting a plane from the top, and of course you want to minimize any kind of distortions. For example, if I'm looking from the top now onto this barrel and say, yeah, this is how the side from which I want to project my texture coordinates, this of course works. If I'm looking at this slanted side here, of course you have those issues here where you can only see the back sides of those there on the front, on the rim, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I selected apparently also this back here. What did I do? What happened here? Oh, of course, yeah. I have to make sure here with my selections that I'm not selecting anything else when I'm expanding my selection. Okay, so I'm doing texture mapping there. And I open up my UV texture editor, and you can see here those big squares there and the triangle, those are the new faces that I created here by just extending or extruding the fringe inwards. So they aren't properly textured. I can show you here if I switch on now here this grid view. You can see there on each new face is the whole texture page, which is of course not what we want. So again, let's do the mapping. Clean here up a little bit, or you know what, let's keep the UV editor that you can see what I'm doing, and let's say UV planar mapping, and from which axis it is upwards is the y-axis, so I'm looking down and click apply, and you can see here perfectly round cap of the barrel. This is exactly what I want, and I'm going to move it here to the side for now. And as for the rest of this, you can see here there is still some remainder of the mapping, of the original mapping there, and yeah, that it looks like there is just this one segment here, and it was repeated 4 times, which could work, but for me this I don't like. Okay, so let's switch the pivot here, just put it there on the rim. Then I'm going to duplicate this and just scale it on the y-axis downwards, and just to make sure that I'm not that it's not getting asymmetrical, I make sure that it is scaled by minus the size that I upscaled. So duplicate and holding J. Why doesn't this work? I want to snap the position there. Snap settings absolute ×1. Why doesn't it work? Or is it 0.5? Prevent negative scale. Of course we want to scale it in the negative direction, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You know what? Let's make this simpler. I'm going to freeze now all the transformations, which means right now, because I took the barrel as it was and then positioned it and scaled it up that it looks correct in my scale of the scene, it has already some kind of transformations applied. In this case, it is translation is at x is minus 0.43, the scale is 3.407, and since I know that I won't be using, or that I don't want to reset this to what it was before, I can say I want to freeze this, that this, how it looks right now, is 0 all the way. So edit, delete, no, where was it? Modify, freeze transformations, and everything is now at 0. And when I'm duplicating this now and scale it by -1 on the y-axis, it should look, oh, this was translate, sorry. Scale by -1, and now it is perfectly reflected, but it's still 2 separate objects, but that's not a problem. I'm going to combine those meshes, but the thing is, now they are combined, but their vertices are still individual. You can see if I'm pulling now one vertex, actually it's two vertices on top of each other, so we need to weld them together. I think in Studio Max it is called weld, in Maya it is called merge. And as you can see here, I used the standard settings, and now too many vertices were considered. Yeah, they're pretty much at the same at the same location, so that they are just merged together. So let's do this again, merge, and use the option box here and the threshold. Let's make it 0001, apply, and now only those that are really on top of each other should be considered that they are in the same position and merged. Yeah, this looks correct. Cool. Okay, so now the top and the bottom of the barrel in the texture space are in the same location, which sometimes you want, sometimes you don't want. Those individual parts that you already textured or mapped coherently, or yeah, just belong together without any kind of cuts, is called a shell. And I can select those UV shells. As you can see here, if I'm just hovering my mouse over it, gets selected. It's just like, as you can see, it's just one part of the texture that I can move as a whole, or that is considered a whole. Again, I'm keeping those two caps on top of each other, because chances are slim that you will see the bottom and the front side of the barrel, unless there's some kind of mirror involved, or of course when there are multiple barrels from the same object, of course you will probably see it. You know what? Let's separate them, that you have the top of the barrel and the bottom separately in the texture page. Right now I'm just moving them apart, and I'm not going to distribute them right now. So what is still missing there, of course, is the bulk of the barrel, all the rest. And since I already have textured those things here, I can select everything that I want here in the UV map, and now everything, oh, sorry, wrong view. Everything around it is selected as how I want it to be. So, and now, of course, you can't planar or map those things from one angle or from one axis, because there will already be, as you can see here, there's some on the back side, some there are on the sides, which will be stretched, and so on and so forth. So we will need to use a different kind of projection. And since the barrel is pretty much a cylinder, and it's still called, by the way, an underscore cylinder 03 here in the models. So I'm going to use, of course, a cylindrical projection, which means I'm wrapping another cylinder around this one here and projecting just from the cylinder onto the surface. And where do we have it? Cylindrical mapping here. And when I'm moving this projection cage here, you can see what is happening there in the texture in the UV map. So now that I'm wrapping it completely around it, I can of course make it taller or not as tall, but all I need right now is that I just have it properly mapped and not no faces that are left out. So okay, this looks much better here. Let's have a look here on with the with this grid on, and you can see here what's most important is that you keep distortions down to a minimum. You can also visualize the amount of distortion. I'm not quite sure how it works in the new Maya version, but yeah, it just gives you a colorized view of how much compression or tear and stretching is going on in your textures. But since this is a very simple object, this is fine, only the scaling is not correct. So now I want to squeeze everything into one texture map, preferably a square. For this, I'm going to scale those individual shells down, like so, and that everything fits into this nice little square here. So I'm going to use the side wall of this barrel. It's about 1/2 of this texture square that I have, and the caps on either side, you know what, let's keep them with their size. Because sometimes when you have things with an upper side and an underside, where chances are you might be looking or might be able to see the underside, for example, a table. Of course, you want the top of it much bigger, that it has a lot more information there, more textless than, of course, the underside, because on the underside, most of the time, there is not anything important. But here, as we've seen, you probably don't know how this barrel will be seen from what side, so it's good to have the bottom and the top side just equally sized. And this is, I think, let's bring it up here. This is, I think, more or less how I want it to be. One thing that you have to be, of course, careful about is the texture seam, because you will always have some kind or some instance where the texture comes together. And for example, in this case, it's the side here on the far left and on the far right, and they need to meet, and you try your best to hide this seam, that it's seamless. Okay, let's have another look at the chat and see how many of you I've already lost. I'm not really into modeling. I did try it before for a longer time and made some cool models, that I haven't got far and bothered with it. Coding is what fits me more. Yeah, just pick what's fun for you. Since I have a lot of fun with different kinds of things, I try always to improve on either front. And this week it's modeling. All those options, remembering them is crazy. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'm just showing you a basic workflow that you at least have heard some of the terms, which you can then look up. But essentially, it's very simple. Just get the model right, and then get the coordinates of the texture right, and then you can work with the texture and the shading itself. Because right now, as I have it here, I can add, as we've seen it, add divisions and make this model more smoother. And everything should still work. Okay, but for texturing now, to keep going here. Oh, sorry, I didn't finish here with the chat. I'm just jumping around. Imagine starting to program and reading at first a list of GCC options. Oh yeah, right. C compiler. Holy crap. I'm happy, or I'm lucky that I don't have to code C, because I tried it and failed miserably, and I was so happy when I started out with GameMaker code, because thank God I don't have to write a make file. So this is what made it accessible for me, and yeah, now with object-oriented programming, I'm slowly warming up to it, and then trying to get back to the command line options of a real programming language, essentially from the other side. And make files make sense. Yeah, man, you know what? I need a drink right now, just thinking about those. Okay, you know what? Let's save this here under barrel A. I already have a barrel A. It's called this barrel B. By the way, barrel A is the same barrel, but I didn't do it as nicely as right now. So let's call it barrel A. And as for the texturing, wouldn't it be nice when we go to Photoshop and have this kind of grid overlay there as well, that we know where to put stuff? And yes, it would be nice, and there's even, of course, the option to do this. And I just have to remember where it was, but I think it was some kind of export. You know what, I can't find it here. I have always to use this space manual, which is just a list of all the different menus you have just at your fingertips, essentially. So where we are now, there we go. UVs, I think it was UV sets, and then create empty UV set, autoload textures. Man, it's been a while since I did this. UV snapshot, there we go. You can also create a PSD network, which is quite nice, but I always like to do things manually. And now I can bake the wireframe out to an image file, which I can use in Photoshop, which we'll be using in a bit, as my basis as my foundation for my textures that I'll be making. Nothing too fancy, just something that should work in the scene without being overly complicated, because at the end of the day, it's just a barrel that sits somewhere. It has to look just convincing enough that people don't go, oh, I like this shot, but what's wrong with this barrel? And this is what I'm shooting for. Okay, our image format, I'm a big proponent of the PNG format, and yeah, we can anti-alias lines. You know what? I don't need this. Edge color white is fine, and the size in pixel 2K, 2048 pixels either way is fine. And I'm going to save it there under barrel B UV, and hit apply and close, and it was saved. And now let's go back to Photoshop and do a little bit of texturing. The good thing about this barrel that I just showed you on TurboSquid, not this one, this only comes with a texture, but this one here comes with a couple of textures, and the textures are this ugly concrete there for the ground, and those very basic bricks, which you probably don't need. This very basic wood planks texture that I've seen I don't know how many times before, and this dirty barrel texture. But at least this dirty barrel texture we can work with. So on TurboSquid, there we have crates and barrels, and there is the textures directory. And just to show you, this is the brick texture that comes with it. This is the concrete texture. This is the barrel top texture, I'm not quite sure, and this is the texture for the barrel sides, and this is what we will be using. So, but first, yeah, I'm just bring this in here, and let's find our UV map, barrel UV, and I make, and since it is white on this checkerboard, you don't see a lot, so I create a new layer. It's just a black solid, just that we have a background there. And lo and behold, there is our wireframe on top of it. So the first thing that I do when working with textures is that I'm switching now the bit depth of my image from 8-bit to 16-bit, because you need all the precision that you can get. At least nowadays, I think even until way beyond the 2000s, there were still 8 bits for textures were enough. But with physically based rendering and all these kinds of advanced algorithms, you really need as much precision as you can, also with textures and the color. Okay, but it is fine to just have, in this case, 8-bit textures as a baseline. But if you want to have something like normal maps or displacement maps, it's quite good to have more bits than you probably would need, because with 8 bits per pixel, I mean, it's just 256 values per channel. And with normal maps, this means 256 normal vector angles in a sense. And for some, I mean, most of the time it should be enough, but sometimes when you have a very fine and detailed or gradual changes in your normals, it's always better to have 16 bits per pixel. Just that you know. Man, a lot of words for use 16 bits per pixel if you can. So I create here a new group and call this color map or diffuse map, and just paste what came here. And one thing that you notice is that there is this white fringe here, and you know what? Instead of pasting it right here, I make a new image there and make sure that since this is going to be the side wall of our barrel, I'm going to make sure that this is essentially seamless. So I'm just cutting out this side here, the right side and the left side. I'm not quite sure how they are created. Maybe someone really had a barrel and cut it open and then just planed the sides and then photographed it. I'm not quite sure, but they almost line up. So it comes down to basic image editing. And as you can see here, those rings around it don't line up too well, but it's good enough, well, almost. So I'm just going to stretch and squash it a little bit that it looks better, and going to merge this and try now to hide that there's this hard step between there. For this I'm using the stamp tool and an opacity that is around 18 or 20%, just just to smoothen things out a bit. And yeah, like this. Of course, you could also do something like, for example, here, I'm just making a selection and then right click and fill and use the content aware fill, where Photoshop tries to find patterns and match them as closely as possible. Okay, so this was one side here in the middle, but of course, like I said, we needed to make sure that it wraps around nicely. And for this, I'm just making sure that it fills here the whole space here, and just cut off anything that's outside of the frame. And here's the trick in Photoshop, is to use offset. There's a filter that has been in there for like 20 years. It is filter, other, and offset. It's the bottommost option there. Then you can specify by how many pixels you want to offset something, and this is usually what I do. So since this is around 2K, I say horizontal, I want to move it by 1024 pixels, and now here it's pretty obvious where the seam is. And now I'm trying, just like before, to hide it as much as I can to make it as seamless as possible. Yeah, I'm repeating myself. Yeah, I mean, it's still quite obvious that this side here is a little bit brighter than the other one. I'm trying now with even less opacity, let's say like 20% opacity, and a very big brush here, just to break up those patterns there that are pretty telling that they are going to repeat themselves. So I think this looks nice enough, so I'm cutting it out and pasting it here below my UV map, and now I'm going to squash and stretch it that it fits well. And in Photoshop, I don't want to do this destructively, because maybe usually I shouldn't change my texture size after the fact, but sometimes it's nice to have the option to get back to this original file size where you have everything, because sometimes you scale something down to 10% and then 2 days later think, yeah, I really need this bigger now, and then all the pixels are lost. And in Photoshop you can do something like smart objects, which says, yeah, it retains the size internally, all the pixels, and then just scales it up or down, but you can always scale it back, so it's a non-destructive operation. So it's layer, and let's call this, where is it, smart object, convert to smart object. Now I can do it as before, where I just scale it up and down where I need it or how I need it, and bam, this should be it. Just zooming in and making sure that it covers all of the polygons or all of the mesh segments that we have. Each program calls it differently. Some calls it patches, other calls it polygons, triangles. Essentially, it's those individual faces of the mesh. So I'm going to turn off now the UV, and look at that. It looks nice. And so before I'm doing the cap, now let's have a look at the chat, because I could see it moving a little bit. Imagine starting to program. C is great. Yeah, C is great. Probably best not to imagine that. Every other way, I think, involves dealing with coordinate transforms. Yes, doing it with math is all good, but mechanical parts are a lot harder to work with, probably. Okay, so you're just talking about things, which is cool. So I just want to make sure that I'm not talking into one direction, going off in one direction, while everyone is behind, puzzled at what the hell am I doing. Okay, so the problem there with the barrels that we got from TurboSquid are, you can see here the top part. Usually barrels have some kind of way where you can access the contents. I don't know what the word is, but let's Google barrel or a metal barrel and just see what Google finds for us, so that we know, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. This top side here, where you have this access there, where you can get into what's stored in the barrel. I probably won't be modeling it, but it's just good to know that there is something there. Okay, as a reference, let's have a look at this dirty. Oh, it's already on CG Trader, and it costs, look at this is just a basic barrel and they ask $23 for it. If you're in a hurry, this is probably fine, but we aren't, so we can just use it as a reference. So essentially it's pretty much the same texture, but in a sense circular. Okay, so you know what? Where did we have it? This was the texture that came with this barrel. And like I said, there was this other texture, just that I find it. 4 textures, and the other texture that the original creator used for the top and the bottom of the barrel was this one here, and I think this is a good starting point, which I'm going to just take a square out of it and paste it here. And we can do the same thing as before, where we just say layer, smart object, and convert to smart object. Should the need arise for us to go back to the full resolution, or at least most of the resolution that we still have. So I'm just making sure that it covers the entirety. And the same thing here, but for this side here, I'm going to, good old trick to make something look not as repetitive is just going to rotate it a little bit, maybe mirror it also, and then just do a little bit of back and forth and hope, I mean with the stamp tool, and hope that it's not, all the features don't look, too telling that it's pretty much the same thing. So one thing is that it looks a little bit too bright compared to the rest of this barrel. So I just stick it here in a new group there in Photoshop and add a new adjustment layer that just makes it a little bit darker there. And like I said, since this is an adjustment layer, everything is non-destructive. Because as for me, when I'm working with textures, sometimes you have to iterate a lot and go back and forth, and it's always good to have still the original information there. Okay, you know what? Let's try this out. I'm going to save this now and call it barrel B color source. Because I'm not using the original Photoshop file, which of course you could, but in the end, it's even with offline rendering in Maya, it's a little bit like with real-time rendering is. Of course, you can have all your textures uncompressed lying around, but you probably won't do this because it takes more processing power. So instead of always passing the original Photoshop file to Maya, and Maya has to flatten it down and just convert it to its internal format, I just save it as a PNG, which is a little bit work for me right now. Just barrel source color is PNG, and since it's 16 bits per pixel, it takes a little bit longer, but that's it from me, and it's much easier to work with this in Maya. Okay, so another thing is that now we need a shader, and there are different kinds of shaders for different kinds of renderers. You see, in offline rendering, as we're doing here, which means you're not rendering real time, you have essentially your CPU do the work. And you can do, of course, a lot more. For example, ray tracing, which has become a staple in offline rendering, I think, since even the end of the 90s. Because if it really doesn't matter how long a frame renders, you can just have all reflections be realistic. So most of the time you don't approximate something via cube maps or lighting probes. With offline rendering, you have the time, you have the computing power, because it's not critical that you pump out a new frame every 1/60th of a second, because you can wait sometimes hundreds of hours, like it was with the latest Lion King, where one frame I think rendered for seriously 100 hours because of all the fur and everything, just crazy. So there are different kinds of renderers, of course, because each renderer has a certain, or they have different, what's it called, advantages and disadvantages. And Maya came, or let's open here the render settings, comes with a couple of renderers. One is called Maya Software, which has been in there since even, I think, 1998, which was the first renderer that Maya came with, which doesn't really have ray tracing, but it's quite fast. But yeah, I think nobody really uses it because especially with photorealistic rendering and physically correct rendering, it doesn't support a lot of different shaders, so usually you don't use it. Maya Hardware 2.0 is, I said before, you have your CPU do all the work, but in Maya, of course, you can use here the Viewport 2.0 renderer, and this is, like you would expect it, a GPU renderer. This is what the Viewport uses here, that it updates. For example, you can switch on ambient occlusion. I mean, you don't see much right now with this model, but yeah, you can use pretty much all the DirectX 11 features that there are, or for example, anti-aliasing, multi-sampled anti-aliasing, which I'm not going to activate right now because the last time I did this on a stream, everything froze up. But froze up, did I say throws up? Either way, it wasn't pleasant. And there are the turtle renderer, which I haven't used. I don't know what it is. The Maya vector renderer, which I don't have ever used, so I can't talk about it. And the Arnold renderer, which is the de facto production renderer, because this one produces photorealistic images, I say by default, huge quotation marks there. Before the Arnold renderer, there was the Mental Ray renderer, which you might have heard. This was my favorite renderer because you could tweak a lot of all those ray tracing things like trace depth and anti-aliasing samples and global illumination and final gathering and all those big terms. But then NVIDIA bought Mental Ray, or the company that made Mental Ray, and then NVIDIA said, yeah, you know what, we're more into real-time ray tracing, so the technology is still around, but Mental Ray isn't, much to my chagrin, because it took me years to get into the details and little knobs of Mental Ray, and again, technology moved on. So the Arnold renderer is what Sony Images and Softworks, is it called? Sony Softworks? Yeah, the visual effects arm of Sony uses. I think they started with the first Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, all those swinging scenes. They were done with the Arnold renderer, and which has a couple of nice features, but the thing that just important for me and for us is that it produces physically correct renderings where light behaves as you would expect it, because right now you don't have to fake a lot, because computers are fast enough. But, which brings us back to the shaders, you have still all those legacy shaders in Maya. For example, you have the Blin shader, the Phong shader. By the way, the Phong shader is a very simple shader model. It's from the 1970s, I think. And this is what Half-Life 2 uses. And back then it was just big, having specular reflections. But they aren't physically correct. They're just an approximation, I think that's the word, approximation of how it looks in the real world. But again, back then where computers weren't as fast as they are today, and they are never fast enough, of course, the simpler the model you could use to achieve the desired effect, it always was the go-to. But today now with unified shading and sampling and, like I said, physically based rendering, it's more a tendency to going towards using the same renderer or the same kind of materials for everything else. And yeah, like I said, all those good old Maya shaders like Blin, Phong, Oren, Nayar shader, which is, man, I've used to learn what shader was the best for. For example, the Oren Nayar shader was the best for planets or moons, because the other shaders, the Phong and the Blin shader, didn't look as correctly. And then there was the Catmull ROM shader for something. Yeah, and the fun thing is, by the way, Ed Catmull is the CEO or one of the on the board of Pixar. So those people who made up who created all those algorithms for shaders, they are still around. It's just crazy. Okay, for us, because I'll be going to render with Maya, I'm going to use an Arnold shader. So I've been talking quite a lot just to say, yeah, use the Arnold shader. So we got Arnold Car Paint, Arnold Flat Layer Shader, because with real-time rendering, you don't have this as much, but it's coming, is that you have different kinds of passes, or in real-time rendering, it's different kind of image buffers. For example, you have a Z-depth buffer, which you can use then later on to do some kind of depth of field effects that you don't really have to have a circle of confusion, as it's called in optics, where you really have to trace the rays in a sense, but just use an image buffer of the depth and then just blur the image how the higher the value is, how far a pixel is from the camera, for example. And yeah, in offline rendering, you do this a lot, where you can even separate individual objects, because later in compositing, you want all the tools and still have all this liberty that you can say, yeah, I just want to make the chrome a little bit darker, so all the chrome parts, and you make individual passes for this, which we're not going to use today. So I'm going to use the AI, where is it? Standard surface, and I'm happy with it. So I'm going to apply it to this, and it's standard white and it doesn't look like a lot. And now there comes another thing. I'm going to delete here now the history, edit, delete all by type history, because I'm going to clean up the scene. And essentially this means just making sure that everything has nice names, because sometimes the renderer says, yeah, there has been an error while processing polygon cube 538 that was using shader, default shader 250. Yeah, good luck finding finding the culprit. So, and this is why I try to, especially as early as possible, I try to just give everything nice and coherent names. For example, now this one is called underscore cylinder 03. So I'm going to call it barrel B. And that's it. So there is an empty group cylinder. So we only have barrel B here. And I'm going to do the same thing here for the shader. And if you are familiar with Shader Graph, I think this was once an external plugin for Unity. I think it's integrated right now. I haven't toyed with Unity recently, but essentially it's how you plug together your shader network. So no coding required, which is always helpful if you're starting out. And as soon as you hit a certain glass ceiling, you really want to get into the nitty-gritty and say, yeah, I want to code things. I know what I'm doing. I don't want to wire up variables to certain inputs. And yeah. But it's very helpful if you're a visual kind of person like myself, that you can just click all those together. And everything here, of course, has a default name. So it's AI standard surface 1SG. So I'm going to call it create B. I'm going to copy this and call it SG for shader graph. And this one here is create B shader. And now we're going to import now the map for our color. And this is a file placement node, so I'm going to call this create B color file. And yeah, this is the loading node, and this is the placement node. Because you of course you can say you have a texture that just covers it one, but you can also add texture tiling, and you don't do this in the texture file, but in the placement node. This is Maya. This is a little bit cumbersome, but again, since I'm doing this for 10 years now, so I know that I'm going to call this 2D, and this is my way of naming things. Good, now let's finally import our image file and see this whole thing in action there. And I put it in scenes, barrel B, and there we have this beautiful thing here that is our color map. And if I switch over here to the shaded view, isn't this beautiful? This is our barrel there with top and bottom, and it's shaded. And of course, it doesn't look like a barrel at all because it's just a diffuse reflection. There is no reflection going on or any kind of normal mapping or bump mapping. And yeah, if you're doing something that should be close-up ready, of course, you would do this in programs like ZBrush or Mudbox, where you would really model every nook and every cranny there and have... I always joke that when you have an artist, a model artist, and say to them, yeah, you need just the perfect cube, and they do it in ZBrush, it will come back and have 20 million polygons, because you can really subdivide it as fine as you need it, and then bake a normal map from this, and yeah, just have as much polygons as you need, and all the detail is in a normal map. This is not what I'm going to do, because this barrel is just sitting somewhere in the background. We can fake it. We can do a lot of faking. And let's bring up here the shader graph again. And this here is a preview of the texture, and I'm going to switch it over from hardware to Arnold. So this is this physically based rendering thing here, how it really should look like. Oh man. And when I turn this here around, you can see here, of course, this is not real time anymore. It's close. Turn this in real time, and the longer I wait, with more iterations, it updates the quality of this model. So you can see here we have some kind of highlights, but everything reflects the same no matter what is below there or what's on the map. And usually when I'm in a hurry, and I think that we are, I'm just duplicating here the color that I have and just bake it down, make it black and white, and use this for different inputs. For example, I'm just contrasty like so that just some things are pretty bright and others are not. And I use this for my specularity, or in this case roughness. I'm just going to call it roughness. And also those maps, especially those maps I save, be sure. If we have a look here at all the different options of the shader, we have much more than usual when we are working with color, the specular weight, the metalness, which means that you can't have a light, or you can't have a surface that reflects more light than it receives, for example. So this is not possible, because in reality this is also not possible. But in 3D graphics, for many years we have been doing this, that combinations that weren't physically correct, but in the right lighting or the scene's lighting, it looked correct. But if you, for example, switch you would have to do all the texturing and mapping, and especially the tweaking of the shaders all over again, because like I said, it wasn't physically correct. It was correct just from this one angle or this lighting situation. So okay, we got the base texture, how it reflects, but we also got transmission, if it's some kind of skin, sheen, code, if it's a car paint shader, if it's used for hair, for example, then a thin film also for certain effects, that is as if it's like there's a thin coat on top of it, because the light gets refracted differently, and so on and so forth. So you got everything in there in this little shader, because the good thing is for us that it doesn't have to compile or be calculated at real time. So we're good. Okay, so I'm going to use now this ugly little texture that I made here, and I'm going to use this for our, where is it, specular roughness. So just to show you what this means, I'll make this here a bit bigger here. And now when I turn the roughness down, the highlight gets sharper. So if roughness is 0, the highlight is very sharp, and the further I crank up, it gets much lower in intensity. And if there is a roughness of 1, it reflects, it behaves in a sense like velvet. So everything is just very distributed. And so with this knowledge, I can look at our map here, and this means that, yeah, that pretty much everything that is white is very rough, and everything that is black is not as rough. Or and essentially this is completely incorrect, because we need it the other way around. So I'm just, as you can see here, I just inverted it. By the way, I'm going to save it as a grayscale, because we don't need RGB values when every channel is essentially the same. So I'm going to save this here as roughness. Like in shader graph, you can also do this in Maya and have here some kind of nodes that are in between, that are just map one value to another, or do some kind of calculations, or look up from which direction of the camera you're looking at a pixel. But I'm not going into this today. So okay, roughness, I'm going to import now here another file texture and use it, our roughness here. And there we go. And it should reflect a little bit stronger here on those parts where the metal is exposed. but for some reason it doesn't, probably because it's not dark enough. So I'm trying this, and that the white, that not everything is completely rough in a sense, but something like this. So this doesn't have to be a pleasing image. Again, this is just a map information where each pixel gets sampled and accordingly rendered. So I'm just updating this PNG file there, and I very intense. So I hope it was a little bit interesting at least, and could not save because it was in use. Of course, we're using it here in Maya, and the Arnold Renderer here in our preview is just sampling. To save it as Color Roughness 2, which is always a great or copy or final copy or copy of final, really final version 3. Okay, there we go. Better? It does. Still not as reflective. But like I said, again, this is just for barrel in the background and maybe one in front. So I hope this should be fine. Just, you know what, just for shits and giggles, I'm trying to invert this because maybe I got it wrong. And this is the 3D artist's equivalent of randomly changing variables and see how things behave. Graphics, they're pretty much the same. Okay, roughness 3, just trying it out. And yeah, this, okay. So this is very shiny and very unrough, very smooth, unrough. Holy crap. Very smooth. So yeah, this is not what I want. So this roughness of 2 was all right. Cool. One thing here again is that everything here has this placement node, and I don't need a placement because this map is pretty much not the same. So I'm not, for example, if you have a detail map that is just a very, for example, a structure for the skin, maybe this fine pores of the skin, you can just wrap it around and tile it like 100 times, while the other map with all the facial features, for example, needs to be tiled just one. So you would have different 2D placement nodes, but not in this case. So everything is here, and this is fine. This is fine, and I'm just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to give it a light source here that we just can see if it looks still correctly under different lights. I'm going to use it from this side and duplicate it and have another one from here. And then I'm going to render it with the production renderer that is the Arnold Renderer and see if it looks correct even there. And it's a barrel. In the end, probably we shouldn't have bothered with this roughness and specularity map. But again, yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it looks. Mostly because you can see here all those rings there on the texture. This one here does not correspond well here with what's going on in the mesh actually. So this is not too good, but again, since it's going to be for a scene rather in the background, just placed somewhere, it should be fine. And this is it in a sense of how I create, or well, create, this is the wrong term, of how I take an existing model and just try to make it work for my workflow. And again, just read, this is correct that it always is placed at the origin of the scene. This also helps when you import it later into Unity. By the way, with Maya you can just say file and send to Unity or send to Unreal. And if you have the Unreal Engine or Unity installed and just do a little bit of setup here, you can send it to the current project that you have open in the background, which is really nice. I think also Studio Max does this. I'm not quite sure about Blender, but I would expect or assume as much that there is some kind of integration plugins out there. And this is a pretty seamless workflow because, like I said, most of the time when you get something for free, you get what you pay for, and you have to put in a little bit of work. But yeah, this is just a very quick overview, because of course you can always spend much more time and do some kind of normal mapping and so on. But yeah, just get the model in, get the size right, then get the geometry right, then get the mapping right, and then you can work on the shading. And this is the same thing for CGI graphics as well as for games, I think. Unless of course you create your geometry procedurally. Okay, again, I'm sorry for just talking so much and showing so little apparently, but let's have a look at the chat and see how many viewers are still there. Some audio drops again. Oh no, audio goes away for a few seconds and then comes back again. Oh damn it! I'm so sorry. I hope that isn't too disturbing. But my guess is because I'm having open Premiere, Photoshop, Maya, all the cores are getting used when I'm doing some rendering here or just this preview here. So I think this might be down to just everything demands CPU power. So I'm sorry. I hope it wasn't too distracting. Okay, I try to catch up now with the chat because there's a lot going on there. Wait, isn't it more expensive than the actual barrel on the page before? That was RS803, which is around €11 apparently. Shouldn't be cheaper buy a thing and take a photo than to get a 3D model. Yeah, sometimes some models are way overpriced for what they are. I've seen stuff that I think that I could create in half an hour and it was priced at like $300. So probably no one is going to pay this unless you're in a hurry or an ad agency that really has a deadline in 30 minutes and then you just pay up. And at other times, there's of course the opposite is that you get much more for your value or for the price that you pay for. I once needed a map of Europe in 3D and I paid like, what was it, $40? It was for a client project and I got it with each country named individually, where it had the borders as an individual object, then as a low poly version, I think. So it was just insane. There were many hours of work in this asset, and yeah, there were assets on the same page that cost $500 and had much less features. So yeah, sometimes you never know what you get, but with free, don't expect anything and be happy with anything that you get out of it. Doing the math, if one frame is 100 hours, it would almost be impossible to render the movie. You know what? The thing is, they of course have render farms, which means you get this big, huge room full of servers, and there are like 300 machines in there that are concurrently rendering one frame. So after 100 hours, you got 100 frames, or of course not every frame renders 100 hours, maybe just the close-ups of all those fur in Lion King, for example. But yeah, there's a lot of render farming and outsourcing going on. There are companies that are just renting out their servers. So usually render times aren't an issue anymore. I think the average render time for a Pixar movie has been pretty stable over the years, which was around 5 hours. For Toy Story back then, of course, they had much simpler shaders and models, but in the end it was always 5 hours. But with the exception for Cars, you know what was different about Cars? Ray tracing. All the cars were reflecting the environment, and the renderer from Pixar, that is RenderMan, it's their renderer which you can also license out, but usually this one cheats around a lot. For example, if it renders motion blur, it is of course much faster because you don't see as many details, and the renderer is pretty clever in what to leave out. So yeah, this is with Pixar, and yeah, nowadays 100 hours per frame, sure, why not? Just blink, and I'm already saying the same stuff about today's stuff, but I was probably pretty cool getting around seeing all this. Oh, thank you. So I think this was, at least, like I said, as long as it's a little bit entertaining or interesting to see how the sausage is made, yeah, I'm content. I mean, the lightweight render pipeline has shader graph. There's also Amplify. Yeah, Unity, of course, you got different render pipelines. And the same thing applies also to these offline production renders, because there are different renderers for certain elements. For example, you got different software that only does the calculation of fluid simulations, and it has completely different renderers, and in the end, yeah, you just try to get everything together. And you can also, with the with this material that I showed you, the Arnold shader here, I showed you that it all has these different kinds of options, but usually, since everything is just per default dialed to default settings, it renders pretty fast, unless of course it goes into the branch or into the module if it were a game object with the code. So it is optimized, but of course not as much as for real-time rendering. I wish I was around the late 70s when home computers were this thing that was going to be available soon. You know what you were doing, you could build one yourself. Yeah, the time has passed where you could just comprehend a computer down to the bare metal, what everything is doing. I think this, as soon as computers were around 16 bits, you couldn't quite get down as much to the metal as you could with 8-bit computers. I mean, back then, all the cool shit was coded in assembler, right? And with 16-bit computers, parts of it were still assembler, and today it's you only do get really down to the metal for parts that really demand this kind of performance, right? So again, sorry for the audio drops, and but the rust is very shiny. But yeah, with shaders, I always have to restrain myself, because you can see there's a lot to tweak. There are so many buttons, and then when you start using your own shaders that go in there, and probably we're having some audio drops, so I'm closing this right now. Yeah, I can see I can see the processor temperature going down. So apparently, I'm sorry if there were any more audio drops, because I'm just was rendering there the preview in the material editor. Yeah, it's just very expensive. And you know what? Let's take this barrel here. I'm going to save this now and put it into the scene for good measure, warehouse scene, and see how it holds up. So open scenes warehouse. There we go. Or this is right. This is the perspective view, and I'm going to just say import, and let's knock on wood that this works, that this whole thing that I just did really works. Where are we? Scenes. No, this was wrong. Of course, like I said, I put it under shared assets. There we go. Setups Maya, scenes, barrel B, and I call it barrel A. Yeah, let's rename this to barrel B. Because, yeah. And my fear is now that everything is now completely the wrong size. Now, where is my barrel? There it is. Okay, cool. So it appears as if it's too small, but it's not tiny as a thimble, or not oversized like a huge tank or something. But I just want to scale it up. Why won't you let me? Snap off. I think this was it. Yes. And now this beautiful barrel is here in our scene, and it looks like it completely doesn't belong here, but maybe I'm going to stack it here against the wall in a final thing. Always make sure how it looks through the camera. Maybe there is just a bunch of stacked barrels there, just to give it a little bit more interest. I'm just going to duplicate it, and to avoid the dreaded appearance of repetition, I'm just rotating it around, like so. Oh man, and this is the very simple way. Of course, I imported the light sources that I just used to lit the barrels before. And yeah, this is the very simple and very straightforward way of, yeah, modeling, mapping, texturing, and shading. What I really wanted to show you, actually, but since we're in now already 90 minutes, I really wanted to show you all those street lamps. Because this is one of the models that I did myself. Just to quickly show you, you know what, let's save this first. Saving is important. And where do we have shared assets, setups, Maya, scenes, LA Street Lamp A. And this is here my very own street lamp, which I modeled within, I think it took me 2 or 3 hours just for this thing here. And as you can see, it's pretty low poly and not textured or sampled at all. And of course, this needs to be flipped, that it also here on the other side, like so. And the most fun part, or well, most fun part, oh yeah, you can see here if I'm doing this just by the rule of thumb, it's completely ugly. But I think you get the gist of it. And by the way, this block here is just for size reference. That I just know how tall it is, that it works within my scene. And what actually I wanted to do today is do the whole mapping for this street lamp, because apparently, of course, I closed Photoshop and with it I closed all my references, because the thing about me is that I like to do my research properly, and in the end I get lost. And just to showcase how I overthought this whole process of getting the correct street lamp here, I found this a great site, the Water and Power Associates, which is just concerned with power consumption and water and spending of Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles. But they have this huge wealth of articles and especially photographs of how things were back then, of the whole infrastructure of highways. And in this case, it's the early Los Angeles streetlights. And just to scroll this page, you can see there are hundreds of photographs there, and all with their they're sorted. Each one has a date, a location where it was recorded, and what's special about this one street lamp. And for example, this helped me a lot with finding the right look for my stupid little project of making a 1940s film. You can see here they have a lot of references for the street lamps, but I didn't find the one that I would have liked. But the good thing is that now with this website, I really knew the name of the manufacturer and the type of street lamp model. And this is what helped me get the right references for my thing here. Yeah, again, I said I wanted to do this there and also have some kind of that the lights themselves the geometry itself is a light source, which you hardly can afford in real-time 3D. But this actually I wanted to show you, but I think you get the gist of everything that I that I wanted to do today. So again, I hope that this was somewhat interesting and not completely overwhelming for any of you. I can see there are 4 concurrent viewers, and I think one is me in the other channel, so we're a very intimate group today, which is completely fine. And again, next week, you know what, we don't be needing this one here, so I switch back now to the full webcam. So much better. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Next week there won't be a stream because there is Ludum Dare, and I hope all of you who are watching, which is 3 or 4 people right now, will partake in Ludum Dare 45, because I know that I will, and I'm stoked, and I already got a lot of hard drive space free that I can shovel on new footage. So far I didn't have to delete anything, which is great. Yeah, and I hope I see you there on Twitter or on the Ludum Dare blog. And again, we're just shitting on the theme, because the theme will always be crap, and then just make something from nothing. And I like I said, I'm really looking forward to it. But the one thing that I can't promise is that the Ludum Dare 42 documentary will be done by then. You know what? I'm pretty sure that it won't be finished. But again, I still have the plans to do for the upcoming Ludum Dare, as well as for the past ones. I have all the footage. I have even written the script already for most of them, or at least in the first draft. So those will be coming, but not as overscoped as the current one that I'm still working on after more than a year, because I'm crazy. And afterwards, the week following the Ludum Dare, then I will be playing your games live on the stream. Again, I will be posting the link also on Twitter and on the Ludum Dare blog, where you can submit your games to me. Then on the stream, I will throw it into my RNG 2000, my random number generator, which will pick random games. And then I will download them, play them, and rate them, and give them my judgment. Okay, if this sounds great to you, then thank you so much for watching, and I will probably see you around the next time. Let's have another last look at the chat and see if people are still there. And yes, they're still there. I should be there. All this is great, Frank. And Lion Tari already says good night, and Kersey Boo, sorry, already said bye. Then I will also follow your lead and also say thank you so much for watching. See you next time, and yeah, happy preparation for the Ludum Dare Jam. Cheers.